Hey everybody, I'm ready, and I have to apologize in advance if I left out one of your treasured favorite Christmas shows, movies from then. But I mean, I wanted to bring in a few obscure films that really you should watch for Christmas, but you may have totally missed them. But this is about how these films got made, and a lot of things. After all, making movies is a business, and there are a lot of things that either made the picture a success, or in one way or another, made the picture a failure. So you're going to hear some, you know, bit of a business edge to this, but that's Hollywood. So anyway, go on. Another thing I should point out is that none of these films, while nominated in the various Oscar categories, none of them ever actually gained the Oscar for Best Picture. So let's start. Okay, the first thing we got to do is we got to talk about snow. You see a lot of snow in these movies, and according to Snopes and various other sources, um, basically it would be illegal to use most of the ingredients used in movie snow back then today. And some of the things that they used were salt, sugar, flour, soap, cornflakes painted white, which actually was much more effective in the silent era. Once the microphones got there, it was crunch, crunch, crunch. And they also used marble dust. And if that wasn't bad enough, they also had something that was really especially yummy. They used chrysolite asbestos. And the most famous film ever to use that was The Wizard of Oz, when they fall asleep in the poppy field and Glinda sends Snow to wake them up. That was asbestos. Okay, anyway, Bachelor Mother was actually made in 1939, and it was very offbeat comedy, not extremely Christmassy. Most of the Christmas you see are actually in Holly Parrish's department store job, because this is what happened. She sees a woman abandoning a baby on a foundling home steps, and she brings it in, and from then on, everybody thinks it's her baby. Now, this was a very, very sensitive topic back then. In fact, a current review at the time said that the film made it safe for unwed mothers in the media. And according to some of the information I received, Ginger Rogers didn't really like the picture and didn't think it would be very successful, but it actually was. And a lot of the sexual references they were rather risque for 1939, and the innuendos, but it's really a terrific picture. And it actually was a very, very big hit. And one of the things you see in this picture, you see her, Ginger Rogers, handling this strangely Donald Duck looking toy, which is hilarious to watch. You got to see this picture just to see the duck, and because it actually moved and it actually quacked. But if it looks something like Donald Duck, there was a major reason for that, because RKO, which made this picture, was distributing Disney's films until the Walt Disney Studios could do it by themselves. And despite her dislike for the film, this actually got her apart the next year in a film called Kitty Foyle, where she played a real unwed mother, and she got her one and only Best Actress Oscar for that in 1941. So it actually paid off very well for Ginger. Now, David Niven was her male co-star. This really is a true story. He had returned to England when World War II started, and in 1944, he got stuck at a checkpoint, an American checkpoint, because Uh, the Germans, it's not well known, but the Germans were actually using uh, Germans who had spent time in the United States, who had a perfect command of our language. They were putting them in captured American uniforms and spreading them all around to cause chaos all over the place. So, of course, the military were very, very suspicious. They want to know who were these people really. So they asked Niven uh, who won the 1940 World Series, and his response was, "I haven't the slightest idea, but a few years ago I did make a film in the States with Ginger Rogers." And the MP says, "All right, Dave, you can pass, but for Christ's sakes, be more careful." And the next one is genuinely, honest to God, recognized Christmas classic, which hopefully many of you have seen. To Shop Around the Corner, and it's a story that, in some way or another, has really cropped up quite a few times. And it's about two people who work together who despise each other at work, but are secret pen pals and are falling in love. And this was a reteaming of Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan, and they had been friends since their young, starting acting days, and they had appeared in a serious drama called The Mortal Storm. And but I mean, even he wasn't spared or scorned, because unlike most actresses of the period, she was openly scornful of the Hollywood lifestyle and all this stuff. And she could be very, very short-tempered. And this was proven. He said that he was so nervous about doing a scene where he had to raise his pants cuffs and show his calves, because he told Clara he was going to do it. And what happened was is that he was so nervous he blew uh, the line, and I mean, when they he even requested another actor to pose with better looking legs than he had to do the scene, because you didn't see his face there. And she just went, nuclear on him and everybody, and she threatened to quit the picture immediately on the spot. And so he says, we did more takes, which turned out to be 48 in all. So that's a lot of takes. And this is a shot of the store they worked in. It sold little gifts and perfumes and things called Matusex. And it's supposed to be in Budapest. And it says here, the shop around the corner at the same time reunited Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart as a delightful screen couple and reestablished the fact that the tragic little heroine of Three Comrades can be, on occasion, a fascinating comedian as well. And it was really, really a very good film. In fact, Ernst Lubitsch, the director, he was known for his light romantic comedies. They called it the Lubitsch stunt. And one of the things he told Sullivan to do, he didn't want her to go get Clara's first dress out of the wardrobe department. He asked her to buy the cheapest one she could find off the rack, which cost $1.98. And in order to make it look even more worn, they actually had it washed several times and left to dry in the sun to make it look as authentic as possible. And this is what he said that he, Lou said it didn't cost very much for such a cast, under $500,000. It was made in 28 days, and I hope it has some charm. And it did. The worldwide gross was something like $37,000. So and it actually made quite a bit more when you think about it. It was like actually 360,000, 368. So it made its investment in one way or another, and it keeps being shown. And also, you may have seen it in its other versions. It was remade as a musical for Judy Garland in 1949 called In the Good Old Summertime. And it was remade with Tom Hanks in 1998 as You've Got Mail. And it's appeared in one form or other on many, many different Hallmark and Lifetime Christmas movies. It's just a subject that just never quite goes away. Now, here's something that you probably never even thought of this as a Christmas film. I've spoken to quite a few people over the years about it. And Remember the Night was also made in 1940. And it's basically about Stanwyck played a jewel thief. He actually stole a diamond brooch, and my understanding was that the $500 diamond bracelet he stole was actually real, that they had borrowed just for to film the scene. And she gets caught and has to spend Christmas in jail. And McMurray is the prosecutor who feels sorry for her and bails her out. Well, in one way or another, they actually wind up spending Christmas with his family in Indiana, and the whole experience really transforms Lee, and that's what makes it really worth looking at. But this is a scene. This is where Lee would have been placed into jail for Christmas. It was called the Women's House of Detention in New York. And now the prison is gone, long gone, but the turreted building to the right was the original courthouse, and it's now a branch of the New York Public Library, and it's like the coolest library building you could ever walk into. I mean, the reference desk is in the old jail cell area, and so it's a lot of fun. Every time I go back to New York, I try to get into that. But one of the things about the film was that Preston Sturges, the writer, was so impressed with Stanwyck's work that he vowed that he would write a film script just for her. And he delivered the next year with a film called Ball of Fire, which is not Christmassy at all, but it's worth watching because it's a modern, real person retelling of the tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it's very, very funny. Now, one of the other things Preston Sturges vowed was that he was so irritated by how the director Mitchell Lyson had actually decided to make his presentation. He took most of the focus away from Lee and transferred it to Fred McMurray's character because he thought that would play better. And so Sturgis said he was never going to write a script for somebody else to direct. And after that, he never did. Every single picture he made after, he directed personally. And the picture actually wrapped up early and $50,000 under budget. And Lyson attributed that pretty much to Sandwich for punctuality and doing a lot of scenes in one take. But yeah, I think basically if you can find this picture, and it might be some of these pictures might be on YouTube. I would check the library catalog. A lot of libraries have some of these films, and if they don't have it, they can borrow it through interlibrary loan. And you also might check out the library offers the Hoopla website, which you can get with your library card. So there's a lot of options to find all of these pictures, and definitely try that. Now, of course, Holiday Inn, a good part of the picture takes at Christmas, and uh, that introduced the song White Christmas. And of course, everybody knows the song because they play it every single year. But you know, it's the amazing thing is that Irving Berlin and who wrote it and Bing Crosby who sang it, they got it totally wrong. They never expected that to be the takeaway hit. To them, they thought the Valentine's Day song, Be Careful It's My Heart, would be it. And Bing, even in the first playthrough, he looked over the music and said, Berlin says, this one's not going to cause any trouble, Irv. And, but it actually was number one for 11 weeks in 1942, and again in the top 10 in 43 and 44. And overall, something like 100 million versions of this song have sold over the years. So it's probably even more than that. But so it just provides a different perspective. One of the things I liked most was that Irving Berlin became the very first uh, person ever to present and receive an Oscar at the sort of he gave it from himself to the presenter to himself as the winner. And here's a rare backstage view. One of the things you may didn't know maybe was that Holiday Inn used the same set for Holiday Inn in 1942 and later on for White Christmas in 1954. And I'm actually going to see a live version of White Christmas in about a week and a half, and it looks really exciting on stage. Now, the reception, the film made 18.8 million at the box office, and that's quite a lot of money there. And it's described it, and it was a sparkling musical of New York's opens at New York's Paramount, and it's still a favorite. You see it every year on TV somewhere, and even though it has a really serious limitation in our day and age, I think only PBS has the guts to show the appalling February Abraham number in blackface. So if you want to see the whole picture, you have to probably go to PBS or look around for it on YouTube. Now, another one maybe you never associated with Christmas was The Man Who Came to Dinner from 1942. And Sheridan Whiteside is this world famous lecturer and writer, and he's making a call to promote on these people called the Stanleys while he's speaking in Visalia, Ohio. And he winds up slipping on their doorstep and breaking his leg. And he just causes chaos and mayhem all the way through. It's really I'd say it's probably one of the funniest Christmas movies ever made. And what happened was the play was actually built based on a real person, Alexander Wilcox, who was like Whiteside, exactly that. He was a guest who was always in demand. He knew a lot of people. He was very popular. He broadcast on the radio. He wrote for the newspapers. He did everything, and but he was a handful as a guest. In one case, while staying at someone's home, he had a telephone line put in just for his own personal use, and had it charged to his host. And they were trying, Kaufman and Hart got the idea for this story because Wolcott was invited to the Bucks County farm the Harts owned in Pennsylvania, and he arrived early when the Harts weren't there. And by the time they arrived, he had the whole house up in arms over his high-handed demands. And when Hart was telling Kaufman about that, he just said that just think, he said, just imagine if he had broken his leg there. And this was the opening gun of one of the best comedy hits of the 1939-40 Broadway season. And when Kaufman and Hart were casting the play, they approached Monty Woolley, who was then a professor at Yale, to play Whiteside. And they actually wrote him and saying, would it amuse you to play the part of Whiteside? And Woolley replied, it would amuse everyone. And he went on to do the picture, but not exactly it wasn't a lead pipe cinch. And this had major casting issues because Betty Davis, when she saw the play, she lobbied very hard for Warner Brothers to buy the film rights, and she intended to make it as playing her part of Maggie, uh, Whiteside's assistant, and she wanted to play with John Barrymore. And if you're wondering, that is Drew Barrymore's grandfather, and that's the picture of him in the middle. And he arranged for a screen test, but poor John was very, very ill at this point. Actually, he would die that year. So he simply couldn't remember his lines, and so it just wasn't to be. And Warner's proposed Cary Grant to play Whiteside, which Davis fought very hard against, and so much so that Grant voluntarily withdrew. And so eventually they had to settle on the part for Monty Woolley. Now, apparently, there were no real Christmas movies in 1943, so we're skipping ahead to 1944. And I'd say the last third of this movie, this is really basically Christmas, and of course, it produced one of the Christmas songs, "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," which, from my sources, indicated it took a long, torturous time for them to write, but there were some definitely casting issues with this because. Um, Garland really tried very hard not to play this part, and she got her mother. That's Garland with her mother Ethel, and I mean she just scoffed at the idea of playing a teenager again because she was 21 and she had already made two films where she played a person her age. And I mean, Ethel went to the mat with Louis B. Mayer to try and get them out of it. But when he spoke with the production team, they said, no, this Garland is a must-have. And finally, Vincente Minnelli, who he later married, and that's how Liza came to us, he finally persuaded her to really take the part. And later on, she recanted a bit and said that it actually turned out to be one of her favorite roles. And and this was basically the author's fantasy script. Sally Benson started writing stories about her upbringing in St. Louis for the New Yorker magazine, and she eventually put it together into a book, and it was the book that they filmed. And if you remember the film, the Father Smith is going to open his an office for his firm in New York, and he's the only one who seems to want to go. Nobody else does. And in the end, he actually changes his mind. They're not moving to New York. However, in real life, that's not what happened. Uh, Benson's father got an opportunity to take a job in New York. He packed up the family, sold the house, and got them all to New York, and they never even returned to see the St. Louis Exposition, which is how the movie ends. and she was hired on to help them make the movie. And there's another issue. Now, Margaret O'Brien, who's in her 80s now, she actually told this very strange story about it. She said her mother, Gladys, thought that she wasn't being paid enough salary. And actually, she managed to get her up to, O'Brien said she made $250, while I think Garland got 25,000. So it was quite a disparity. So I can't even imagine how much lower they could have made it. But what happened was is that Gladys threatened to take Margaret to New York rather than having her be in the movie. And she knew that Margaret was the first choice to do that. And what happened was is that MGM actually even got to the point, according to Margaret, of actually testing, wardrobe testing, a daughter of one of the workers at the studio, and it seemed like they were going to use her, but Gladys O'Brien settled with Louis B. Mayer. Margaret was cast, and I mean, this is truly a bizarre story. She said that while she was filming, standing on the set, a huge light came from above and crashed to the floor just inches away from her. And they found out that it was the rejected daughter's father who had done this. I mean, he was literally escorted off the set, fired, and he actually wound up in lunatic asylum. So he was seriously disturbed. So it's hard to believe that there's such a dark story associated with such a great film, but it does happen. And one of the things they did is that the shooting started production actually December 7th. It started 80 years ago today. They started shooting Meet Me in St. Louis. And they originally had $1,112,000 for a 58-day shoot. It actually turned out to be 71 days due to Judy Garland's frequent absences because she was having problems. Um, she needed sleeping pills to go to sleep. She needed, you know, basically uppers to keep her awake. It was just horrible cycle. And even Mary Astor, who played her mother, took her to task. She kept the whole cast and crew waiting while she was holed up in her dressing room one day. And she went into her dressing room and asked her, Judy, what's the matter? You used to be better than this. And she said, Ma, she wasn't how to call her Ma, that I can't sleep. And she says that, you know, you just simply have to do better than that and get on out there and do it. But so the budget was raised to 1,500,000, and today in 2023 dollars, that would be something nearer to $27 billion. And half of the film's budget was just delivered, devoted to sets. In fact, they spend nearly $500,000 on the set and over 200,000 for the music, even though some of it was actually period music, uh, like Under the Bamboo Tree, that didn't actually have to be written. And so this is a rare view of the Smith family parlor, and you see some of the equipment hanging around, and there's Judy Garland and Leon Ames sitting in the bay window waiting for the sets. And I mean, Benson was invaluable. She described her St. Louis home's furnishing in the most minute detail. And whatever she couldn't fill in, they used 1903 or '04 Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, and Marshall Field's catalogs to get the costumes and get the furniture, everything, just right. Now, the street on which they built the St. Louis set, and that's what it was always known as the St. Louis set. It was built on backlot number 3 in Culver City. It stretched several blocks, and as you can see, all of these homes had to be built. It reportedly cost $250,000 to build. Um, I checked and I found out that's what the US government was paying to build a new aircraft carrier that year. So that was quite a lot of money. But I mean, the film cost over 1.5 million to make and made uh, over 6.5 million in sales, box office sales. And that would be in today's dollars, $118 million profit. So it definitely made its investment and more so. And but that wasn't always the case. And here's this film made so much money. It was the highest grossing MGM release for 20 years, except for Gone with the Wind. And here's a contemporary ad. And the World Telegram said, "Joy unbounded." So, and one thing I also noticed on the lower left, it shows you when the doors would open for the first feature. They opened at 9 a.m. So that I think that was a pretty good reception. Now, here's something you probably never even heard of. I've spoken about this to a lot of people, and they say they have never heard of this film. And it's called "I'll Be Seeing You," and it's really a very tender drama about two people who they're random strangers. They meet on a train, and they wind up spending Christmas together. And here's what made it so unusual. And I mean, from the very first, you realize things are a little out of joint. For instance, Ginger Rogers is being sent back. She's on a Christmas release from prison because she's going to be released soon, and she's spending it with her family. And Joseph Cotton plays uh, what we call PTSD vet who was in a military hospital and they were trying to get him out amongst real people and to sort of get used to reintegrate him into normal life. And I mean, I really mean this when I say Ginger Rogers had a Me Too modern trope because Mary's, sentence was for manslaughter, and because while she accidentally caused her boss's death when he tried to sexually assault her. So it's a very modern subject, even though it's a period film. And Cotton performed as a victim of PTSD, which they called battle fatigue in those days, and which was still they were still coping with trying to understand more about it through psychiatry. And the thing with Cotton was it was really funny because Ginger Rogers wasn't supposed to play the role. It was actually offered to Joan Fontaine, who, for rather other commitments, couldn't do the film. And in reverse, Cotton, by taking this role, missed out on a chance to be the male lead in Hitchcock's uh, Spellbound with Ingrid Bergman, and that's Hollywood. but I think it's a worthwhile film. Definitely check it out. Now, another one, not quite as familiar, but definitely deserves to be in the Christmas pantheon. This is Stanwyck's second Brit in the Christmas movie classic Sweepstakes. And it's a romantic comedy of errors, and Stanwyck plays a young woman who's hosting um, a young sailor who, uh, in one way or another, her publisher finds out that what kept him alive is uh, on this raft in the Pacific was him imagining all of Elizabeth Lane's writings about life on her farm with her husband and her child. However, there's no husband, no child, no farm. She's actually, it was all made up, and she played this sort of, um, Martha Stewartish type of home care expert. And she just got all of her information secondhand. She was a total phony. And so she's in a panic when her publisher says, "Oh, we have to do this." And luckily, she had a man she was seeing, a fiance who actually did have a Connecticut farm. And so they're doing this grand charade for Dennis Morgan's benefit. And it's actually a lot. It's a lot of fun. And basically, they offered to part to Betty Davis, but uh, she she had two films that had been released in 1944. She had made, and that amounted to 13 since 1940, 13 films in 4 years. I mean, they kept them very busy, the studios then, because they got paid whether they were filming or not. And I mean, nowadays, when an actor and everyone is hired to make a film, they're all independent contractors who are just contractually bound to that film, and they get paid for doing that film. Now, in case you ever wondered why they show miles and miles of credits, including caterers and cab drivers, it's because that's how they do it now. But back then, it was totally different. You worked for the studio, and if you weren't working, they were losing money. And actually, the film wound up being a big hit and made over $3 million and almost $1 million more overseas. And but not everybody was totally on board. There was one critic named Emmanuel Levy. He said, film obviously propagated conservative ideology, sending women to the kitchen to dutifully play their roles as housewives and mothers after tasting some emancipation during the war years. And if you see Stanwyck with the pan and everybody's looking on, and the person who really knows how to cook is holding his hands in prayer, it's a delightful scene. Okay, this stunning outfit was designed by Edith Head, and she really designed most of the costumes for Stanley. They were totally in sync on what was her best look. And Head actually wound up winning 8 Oscars for her work, more than any other Hollywood designer, and that's including Adrian, Helen Rose, you know, all those people. So she was very, very talented. Now, of course, we get to the penultimate. It's a Wonderful Life. And actually, I found out that of all the films I researched, It's a Wonderful Life and Miracle on 34th Street seem to have the most coverage with um, Meet Me in St. Louis coming in sort of a good third. And this film had sort of this strange route to becoming a Christmas classic, and I'll tell you how. First of all, it started out as a Christmas card. Uh, this is the author Philip Van Doren Stern. He tried to get magazines in New York to take it as a story, and he was having no luck. So he still thought the story was worth sharing. So he wrote it in book form and gave it out as Christmas cards called The Greatest Gift. And a producer from RKO actually got one of those cards and managed to convince the film to be made. And finally, and so it actually also ran in Good Housekeeping in 1945. Now, here's casting. This was the original George Bailey. Cary Grant was back to do play George Bailey, but Frank Capra, whose film Liberty Production was making the film, because what had happened was that Paramount picked up the film as a vehicle for Grant, but then they decided to sell it to Capra's company. And Capra, who had worked with Jimmy Stewart before in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he thought he would be a better fit for the role than Grant. And it was a very tense shoot. And this was from Donna Reed herself to her daughter. It was her first starring role. And it was Capra's and Stewart's first movie after their war service. And that was a very serious issue for the male actors in Hollywood at the time, because most of them were uh, between like maybe 36 and 42 when the war started, and they gave up 3 years, three bankable years of their careers in order to do what they had to do. I mean, and they wound up in all sorts of places. For instance, Clark Gable was a photographer on bombing missions over Germany. So, it wasn't that they sat them at a desk, they all participated. But in the meantime, they have been, the public forgets if they don't see you in the movies or after a while. And Stewart and Capra both felt they had to reestablish it. And he said Stewart was very, very nervous about the telephone scene where they kissed each other. Now, this is Jimmy Stewart's a movie mom. Beulah Bondi started on the New York stage, and she always played films older than her real chronological age. And she played Stewart's mother in 4 films, and before this and one after. So it's a lot of fun. They obviously got on very well, and I think it shows in the film. Now, the Bedford Falls was an amazing set. It was one of the largest of its era. It was an outdoor set, parts of her indoor, parts of her outdoor, and it actually covered 4 whole acres on a lot in Encino, California, and 75 structures had to be built to represent the town. And that's quite a bit. But they actually had a big budget for the time. They actually had $3.7 million, and that's almost as much as it had taken to film Gone with the Wind a couple of years before. And so the crew spent a lot of time on the set. And because it was in the middle of the summer and it was California, what I'll tell you what they used for snow. They weren't using the asbestos. What they were using was something called foamite. It was carbon dioxide foam, mostly used in fire extinguishers, along with the soap, sugar, and water that were sprayed in jets all around the set. So next time you see it, definitely, appreciate this marvelous set. And I couldn't resist this title. It's the curious incident of the behavior of the FBI in the night. And the FBI actually reviewed this and other Hollywood films in the belief that the movie industry was communist uh, infiltrated. And this, of course, was the beginning of the McCarthy era of the late 40s and early 1950s, where people were blacklisted because of possible communist affiliations, whether true or not. And an agent actually looked at it and he considered that there was a malignant undercurrent in the film. And it says that there were two common tricks that communists used to put propaganda into a film. And one of them was smearing the values or institutions judged to be particularly American, as exemplified in this case, the capitalist banker, Mr. Potter, is portrayed as a Scroogey misanthrope and glorifying values or institutions judged to be particularly anti-American or pro-communist. And they said it was a subtle attempt to magnify the problems of the so-called common man in society. And I mean, the film got released, but it, it turned out to be a terrific failure. However, uh, one of the things that the Roman Catholic newspaper, the Tablet, they actually liked the film's so-called family values, and basically they liked common people getting together, overcoming adversity. And the reviews weren't terrible, but they also weren't great either. And 1946 was not a really good year. Movie box office receipts were totally down throughout. And actually, the film had one of the strongest box office showings that year. But it didn't make a profit. It cost 2.3 million to make, and it actually had five Oscar nominations, and it was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and they had one win for technical achievement. For you might have guessed it, it was Fomite, and it was turned out to be over $500,000 write-off for and destroyed Liberty Productions for good. And it was just it was in such jeopardy that one of their advertising schemes was to post popcorn receipts in movie theaters to indicate attendance, because back then there were no multiplexes. When you went into a theater, there was only one movie from anyone up to from 200 to 1,000 people to sit watching the same movie. So as weird as the popcorn thing goes, it really was true. And so you have to wonder, uh, how did this film get to be so popular when current audiences weren't really seeming to get it? And there was a reason. And it turned out to be a very expensive clerical error. Um, the studio failed to renew the copyright, and then it became entered into the public domain, whereas anyone could use it. And in the 1970s, throughout most of the 80s, it was a familiar uh, film. You could see it almost any time of the day or night on many, many different channels. And people showed in church halls who had projectors and screens and all sorts of things. And uh, between the constant showings and the mid 1970s recession, which forced more people to stay home, it just gradually began to show its attributes. And it really wound up becoming one of the greatest Christmas classic movies of all time. And moving on to Miracle 34th Street, which was also something of a, in a way, magical picture. And the cast and crew are very well integrated into this film. And in her autobiography, which wrote quite a bit about the film, Maureen O'Hara said that there was sort of a magical spell over the production. And one of the ways she said was that she and John Payne and Edmund Gwenn, who played Chris, would take walks after shooting on Fifth Avenue to look at all the department store Christmas displays. And he said Natalie Wood couldn't go with them because she was 8 and she had to go to bed. But said Edmund especially loved those nights and acted more like a kid who might be getting the presents instead of Santa would be giving them. And she said, I got a big kick out of seeing the expressions of window dressers when they saw Edmund peering in at them. Said, I knew he was going to make a big splash as Santa Claus, and everyone felt the magic on the set. And we all knew we were creating something special. Um, this was special enough that a year later, O'Hara, Payne, and Gwen all joined together to do a Lux Radio theater broadcast, and which didn't always happen. And she also said that Payne was so taken with the movie, he really wanted to make a sequel, and that he was actually writing a screenplay, but and was going to send it to her, but she said she never received it because he died unexpectedly, and whatever happened to the script, she never learned. Now, this is one person who definitely wasn't in the movie, and O'Hara was another person who almost wasn't in the movie. And now Cecil Kellaway was a noted Irish actor, and he was offered to part of Chris, and he turned it down because he made the statement that Americans don't understand whimsy, and it was offered to his cousin Gwen, who, I mean, basically he jumped on that part and never let go. And he played Chris all the way through. I mean, he never always appeared on set fully dressed as Chris, was in character throughout the entire shoot, and it was just amazing how he took to it. Now, O'Hara was offered to part, but she had just moved back to Ireland and was intending to stay. But they sent her the script, and when she read it, she knew she just had to come back and do this film. Another thing that helped the film was the extreme cooperation they got from Macy's, allowing them to film whole scenes in their New York store. And this is a picture of the crew setting up to do one of the scenes. And here's a letter from the Gimbel's department store. They were signing off, and this was really a very sensitive thing because neither company gave permission to use their names at first. Both of them had to see an actual version of the print. And the movie company said, well, this is what we're going to do. They told them that they were filming certain scenes. They wouldn't let the stores see the footage, and they said they just would have to trust them. So fortunately, for 20th Century Fox and for us, uh, both stores were absolutely delighted in the movie, and they both gave their okay. And this is from Gimbel saying it's fine. You could use it because if they had said no, or even if one of them had said no, whole scenes would have had to be completely reshot. And there's also a second chapter to this because in 1994, they decided to make a remake of this original picture. And they approached Macy's. Gimbel's was unfortunately gone by this time, but they asked Macy's for their participation. And Macy's absolutely refused. They said that they couldn't possibly improve upon the original version. And so if you see it, they have to make a fake store and build sets that were not real department stores like in the original film. And this is something else they had. Edmund Gwenn made a special appearance. They actually filmed at the Macy's 1946 parade, and it, O'Hara said it was she was urgently brought back to New York to film the parade. And she said they weren't going to run the parade more than once on our account. It was a mad scramble to get all the shots we needed. And we can only do each scene only once. So not only did filmmakers have to shoot around the parade as it was happening, but they were also facing unwelcome weather conditions throughout. O'Hara remembered as being bitterly cold during the filming of the parade scenes. And this is Gwen, who Macy's designated the Santa Claus that year. And here he is in the still from the film. He's actually passing the Dakota apartment building on Central Park West and West 72nd Street because I know that building, passed it a million times, so I know what it looks like. And so it was sort of art imitating reality. Now, Natalie Wood was eight, and uh, Gwen was in such perfect character that she said in her autobiography that she really thought he really was. He was so perfect in character, and she didn't know for sure until the wrap party when she saw him in a regular suit. And his beard, when she pulled it on camera, was real. He actually grew the beard. He actually gained weight and to a 55-inch waistline, which to his despair, he found out he could never completely lose when the film was over. But in the scene where he's with talking in Dutch with the Dutch girl, and unfortunately, I hope this isn't too big a disappointment, but the little girl was Marlene Lydon. She was an American girl, and I found a website called DutchHeardHere.net, and they were complaining that uh, it was such a disappointment when people who knew Dutch knew that she was not speaking with a real Dutch accent, and actually both actors had to learn the lines phonetically. And I mean, they just rehearsed and made it letter perfect. But as the website said, I mean, couldn't they have found a real Dutch girl somewhere? And now this is one of a lot of the shots were shot in California on sets. The interior of the house Susan finds at the end of the film for Christmas, which is what she wanted from Santa, uh, where the interiors were done in California, but the house is real. It's in Glen Cove, New York, on Long Island on the North Shore, and it looks very, very much like you see in the still from the picture. I mean, the trees, of course, are a lot bigger. There's a lot more landscaping, and the major change was uh, right there in the white portion. They made a dormer window right there, but otherwise it looks pretty much the same. And it was really funny that when they were filming, I mean, the cold weather had played the entire production every time they had to do an outdoor shot in New York. And in this case, it was so cold, their cameras were freezing, and a woman named Vaughn Melee invited everyone in to warm up and let the cameras unfreeze so that they could shoot. And O'Hara was so grateful that she invited the couple to dinner at 21, and Mrs. Melee was so nervous she reportedly only consumed a glass of milk. Now, there was a minor point. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave the film a B, which was a morally objectionable and part rating. And the reason they gave was because Doris was a divorcee. And that was still unusual enough and not considered quite respectable by a lot of people then. And I hope I'm not being too uh, jaundiced in my opinion, was part of the rating based on the fact that she was a single independent woman making a great life for herself and her daughter. I don't know. I can't say. Well, after being two times a bridesmaid and never a bride, finally Graham got his Christmas film, and this was The Bishop's Wife, which I mean, some people seem to know it and really love it. Some people don't really know of it, but if you don't know of it, definitely check it out. And this is a very funny story about this. Uh, both Loretta Young and Cary Grant thought the right side of their faces was their best side, and they wanted to be photographed in one scene. And the director, Henry Coster, in order to do this, he had a window frame built, and the cameras were placed so that they were looking in at them through the window, and they were standing inside. Grant would be behind Young, and both would be in right side profile to the cameras as though they were looking out the window. And basically, Samuel Goldwyn, the producer, he literally had a fit when he saw it. I mean, he was almost on the point of firing Coster, and Coster referred him to the actors. And when Goldwyn got to the actors, I mean, this is pure vintage Hollywood. He said, "Look, if I'm only getting half a face, you're only getting half a salary," and stormed off the set. So the subject of right and wrong side of faces never came up again. Another problem they had was in marketing the film. The critics liked it, but the box office wasn't going along, and it was because of the title. People thought that this was a religious film because it said the bishop's wife. So, in order to try and solve that problem, they placed out new ads prominently showing Grant as being in the picture. And one of the things said, "Do you know what Cary Grant said to the bishop's wife?" Exclamation point. And it actually worked. This is increased by as much as 25%. And we are cutting near to our very, very, very last film. This is something that a lot of people don't know about. It's called Holiday Affair. And this was a romantic uh, drama. between an unconventional loner and a young war widow with a son. And it's not the best Christmas picture I've ever seen. I think its biggest takeaway for me was that it was showcasing a new post-war crowd of actors who were younger and beginning to take the place of some of the older actors from pre-war. And now this was casting was a major thing for Mitchum because it was damage control. The studios then were very careful about keeping stars' private peccadillos out of the papers because they all signed what they had in their contract, a morality clause. They could be fired if something got too serious. And there are a lot of stories of old Hollywood where they went to great lengths to protect the studio. There was one case in the 20s where a prominent producer was found murdered in his home. And instead of calling the police, they called the servants called the studio, and they were there first. So it was a strange uh, sort of thing. Uh, Now, the young widow, she's set to marry a very dull, a very nice man played by Wendell Corey, who got very good notices for this. And he, uh, she was really marrying more for stability for her son, and she was not really in love with him. And in a way, that's what actually happened. Mitchum, with his uh, different, totally different outlook, free outlook on life, and sort of more daring, more willing to take a chance, uh, actually captivated her. And but overall, the reception were rather average, both with the critics and the box office. One critic thought it lacked the magic of Miracle on 34th Street, even though some of the story elements were the same, mostly the department store aspect. And, the female lead meeting a male lead that they eventually fall in love. There are a lot of parallels, but uh, it's just the way it goes. But it was a decade very, very rich in Christmas programming. And I hope you enjoyed this talk on how these films got put together, what did happen, what almost happened, what didn't happen. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.